and they have 2 children, a boy who's the oldest and a girl. The mother of the slave dies, giving birth to the daughter, but because of the interracial relationship, the husband takes the children back to Germany, to his family, for the children to raise. He comes back to the United States and continues his life here. When the son becomes older, he comes back to America to find out about his father. This is where he meets his wife, Flora Abbott, who was previously married to an Abbott in whose family is from South Carolina. That husband dies, and they have a son named Robert. Well, the mother, Flora, comes back to Savannah from St. Simon's, but there's a custody battle. Sinstack, the son, marries her, and they set up residence in the Woodville area. From what I understand, they were on Albion Street. So on Albion Street, which is, if you go Bay Street, before you get to where the highway intersects there, on the left-hand side, you'll see community healthcare center. That's the family property. That's Albion Street. So on that street, from what my mother told me, there were 3 structures. One was 2 houses and a church. And there is a photograph of the church there. So this would be my mother's grandfather. So Flora and John Sinstack had 7 children. My grandmother, Liza, was one of the daughters. Liza married Ransom McCain. So that's how I'm connected to the Sinstacks, because my grandfather Ransom married Liza Sinstack.
Is the sister of Robert?
Yes, the sister to Robert. The Liza and Ransom had 2 children, Marion and Robert. My mother is Marion. The family, the Sinstack family, has a burial in Laurel Grove South with a large monument that's similar to a monument on St. Simon's Island, where Robert Abbott's mother's side of Flora Butler came from. Before she was a butler, oh gosh, I'd have to look in the book and see who she was. But anyway, so the 2 monuments kind of mirror each other. The names on the monument in Laurel Grove South are the names of the children that John and Flora had. So my grandmother, Liza, I can't remember if she's buried there or not, because there were some children who died young. There was a son, John Jr., named after his father. He died young, and then there was a daughter, Johanna, who died young. But some of the children's names are not on there. But anyway, in Laurel Grove North is the sea captain who came many years ago who married the slave. He's in Laurel Grove North, as well as my mother, because my mother's dying request was to be married with her great-grandfather. So that's where she lays. Ransom was married twice. My grandmother, Liza Sinstack, suffered with asthma, and she died. Ransom married again to Helen Stevens. She was married to a Stevens, and I think, from what I understand, she was married to the family that lived on the corner down here on Darling Street. So, and I cannot think of Tati's name. So growing up here in this area, there were a lot of nicknames associated with people. So the grandmother that I knew, that my grandfather's second wife, Helen, went by the name of, well, she was called Daughter. Everybody around here knew Miss Daughter. And so Ransom and Helen lived over on King Street, the next street over from this. This is Darling Street.
Can you spell her nickname real quick?
Daughter, D-A-U-G-H-T-R. Just so, and it's because I guess she was the oldest daughter, so they used to say Daughter, and that name stuck with her throughout all her life. Daughter. You talk about Miss Daughter in Woodville. Oh yeah. And if you talk about my grandfather Ransom, everybody knew who Ransom was. He was a very tall individual, and he had Indian in his background. But he would always stand erect and keep his two hands in his pocket, and he would walk with authority. He was an interesting person in that he cussed a lot. He just was that kind of a man. He was striking in his appearance, but he loved his family. And he is from Georgia. He had a brother who lived in West Savannah off of Bay Street. I don't know if you ever heard of Michael and Brown Funeral Home. That was on, well, his brother's house, you could see from the road. It was a yellow brick house, and it had a field of sunflowers. You could see it. And you'd often see a woman in a big straw hat out there. That was his wife, Aunt Mamie. And so, Uncle George lived in West Savannah, and Grandpa lived here. Now, the property that my grandfather lived on was part of the property from his mother-in-law, Agnes Bryan, who is Charlie Bryan's mother. Charlie Bryan is who this center is named for, and also the park on King Street that's across from where my grandmother's house is. In his name, we called him Sad. So the park, I believe, is Sad Bryan Park, because everybody in this area knew who Mr. Sad was. So my grandmother's daughter, her brother is Sad. But there were other children, but they moved away. Ransom and Daughter had a child named Gerard. He lived in New York. When he got of age, he moved to New York with Helen, Miss Daughter's other children from her previous marriage. They were all grown, and they moved to New York to pursue their lives. And so that's where my uncle Gerard ended up. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Chicago because the Sinstack family, Robert Abbott, wanted to better the conditions of African Americans that he was taught from his father. And so he is the founder of the Chicago Defender, and a lot of the family left the Savannah area to go to Chicago to help with that endeavor. So most all of the family at some point moved to Chicago. When I have a sister and a brother, so the three of us, even when we were very young, would come here to Savannah and spend our summers here with our grandparents. We were always over there on King Street. And back in that period of time, back in the 60s, the streets were not paved, they were all dirt. And there was no street lights. This was the county area. And there was, it's not there anymore, because the highway is there. The highway 516 never existed. There was a traffic circle that would take you, either you could go further up on 21 or go around to 17 or go down Highway 80. So there were two ways to get to Highway 80. You could take Alfred Street, which is off of Fair Street, which is the main street that goes here through Woodville to Alfred Street, and you take Alfred Street all the way down to the end, and there's a big farmer's market. And so you could take, if you went Fair Street all the way down to Bay Street, you could take that and it would take you to the traffic circle, would take you back around to Highway 80, and you could come back up Alfred Street to get back into this part of Woodville. And we often would go down, walk down to the fair, to the farmer's market, not the fair, the farmer's market, and get vegetables and things that we didn't grow. Now my grandfather, again, the property that they lived on was owned by Agnes Bryan, and everybody knew Agnes Bryan because she worked at the post office. Her son, the property she had extended from King Street, where it dead ends, back over here to Darling Street, up to across from where this center sits. Many years ago, this was a wooded area and it became a playground. And we would often walk from my grandmother's house, the backyard, to her brother's house, to the front yard, to get over here to the playground. Or we would walk to the railroad tracks over here and walk the railroad tracks and pick berries. So I was not allowed to go further than King Street to Donner Street to Uncle Sad's house to where my cousins were. And we could spend time here unless my grandfather took us over to Market Street, where his son married a girl from a family that lived on Market Street. Her name was Marjorie Williams, and then she later married in England because the Williams died. And so when we would come for the summer, we would often visit with our cousins over on Market Street. And you get to Market Street off of Bay Street, which is a little bit down from where the existing Curtis Cooper Center is, but a couple of streets down from where our family's property was. In between Market Street and the Curtis Cooper Center, I think before that, is the road you take to get to the cemetery. Uncle Sad's wife, Aunt Callie, she's buried there. The son, Junior's buried there. And there's some other family members buried there. My husband's nephew's buried there. I don't have all of that history. But my husband is from Woodville. And so he lived on Alfred Street, which is the other main street off of Fair Street. So Fair Street is right up here at the end of this street. And the next intersection, when you have that flashing traffic light, that's Alfred Street. Well, he lived on Alfred Street, and then his cousin, Seeley Fields, which was my grandmother's good friend, lived on Alfred Street. So, and I met my husband many years ago, long before 1970, when I was taking my younger cousin to the playground over here. And he saw me, and we would worship sometimes down here at Taylor Chapel. And then there's another building, I don't know if anybody has mentioned about Miss George's Club. It's a little green building that is between the end of that street and here. It's on the opposite side. So Miss Georgia had, I'm not gonna call it a little juke joint because it wasn't that, but she had a little club and a little storage. You could go and get what we call thrills. I don't know if you ever know what a thrill is, but it's a homemade popsicle that is done in a little paper cup with a popsicle stick. And I'm not sure how she made it, but it was the best thing you could get in the summertime when you were a kid. And I don't to this day remember how much we paid, but my grandparents would let me go up to Miss George's to get a thrill. So you could get a thrill, you could get pig ears, you could get the hot sausage, you could get pickled eggs, you could get all kinds of goodies that I wasn't familiar with growing up in the city of Chicago. I love Savannah. And when we would get our vegetables that we didn't grow, because between my grandparents' house and my grandmother, Helen, her mother's house, Agnes, was a field when I was very young. Let's say, I had to be maybe 7, because I spent my 8th birthday here, and my Uncle Gerard, my mother arranged for me to get a bicycle, and we were trying to learn how to ride a bicycle down a dirt road. So I don't know if you've ever tried to walk a dirt road, ride a dirt road. It's different from a paved road. And he was trying to teach me how to ride this bicycle, and I have the scar to this day on my leg from where I fell off and the pedal cut me. So, but there was a field, and my grandparents didn't have a bathroom at that time. They had built the house, and the bathroom was being built. It wasn't there yet, so we had to go to his mother-in-law's, Aggie, which is just across the field, to use the bathroom. And during the day, we would pick the peas, and we'd sit on the porch and we'd shell the peas and so forth and so on. And I remember as a little girl, all the city-fied clothes we had, because I was from the city. My grandmother didn't want us to wear those, so I was wearing my cousin Pat's dress. This is one of her children's daughter. So we're cousins through marriage, but not through blood per se. And I remember I put the dress on, I put Pat's dress on, and I turned around and around, and I said, oh, I'm a little country girl. It might not have gone over so well, but I was just as thrilled and happy as I could be. So I learned how to shell peas. I learned how to hang out clothes. And to this day, I have a clothesline and I hang out my clothes. And people ask me when they come to my house, you hang out clothes? I said, yeah, I sure do. But I didn't know how until I got here to my grandparents. And my cousin Sharon helped me, because we would help Grandma hang out the clothes, learn how to hang clothes on the line. I had no idea, but I have perfected that. I was talking to my sister the other day about life here in Savannah and the type of food that we would eat. And I know my grandfather would always, he would do the shopping, and he would come back. He didn't have a car, so he would get someone to help take him, or he'd walk. He walked a lot to where they call the 5 Mile Bend. That's a ways away, but that was my grandfather. And he would come back with a slab of bacon, just the raw bacon, about the size of maybe a legal pad. And it had the rind on it. And Grandma would have to slice it. And she would slice it and fry it up, and we'd have that and hoe cakes and biscuits and grits. And her brother Sad, his mother, had livestock, hogs, chickens, goats. Uncle Sad had the ducks and chickens in his backyard, and a certain time of the year they would butcher hogs. And he had a crane, and the lady would come, and I always missed, for some reason, when they killed the hog. I always missed that part. I'm not sure why. But then I always got to see them when they would clean the hog, because my grandparents' backyard faced her brother's backyard. So we just be in the backyard, and we looked and we watched, and it was a thing. They knew Uncle Sad would butcher it all. It was hog killing time. And people would come from the area to help with the hog butchering, because they'd have a lift that they put the hog on, and these big old black pots that they would dip the hog in, and they'd have a fire under it, and they'd scrape the hairs off, and once they got the hog clean and they washed it all down, they would begin to butcher it. And this one lady, she was a character. I don't know who she was or where she came from, but she would always put a little tin cup and catch the first thing of blood, and she'd drink it. I thought, But my grandmother would get the head, and she would make hog head cheese. I didn't know that, and I would follow her foot to foot. And the pig's head was in the refrigerator, and I went to get something out the refrigerator for her, and I said, "Ugh, he's looking at me, Grandma," and I slammed the refrigerator door shut. It's my first time I'd seen a real hog's head on a platter. So that didn't necessarily gross me out, but it was interesting. She would often have on the back porch a little, well, not a little, but a bucket, and she would put certain food scrappings in it for her brother when he came through. He'd whistle, and she'd holler through the back window, "It's on the porch," and he'd be headed down to their mother's house with the bucket to feed the hogs. I remember one night as a child, we were on patrol because a rogue pig from across somewhere was coming down, because I guess animals know where the food supply is. And my Uncle Gerard, my brother, my sister and I, we were on duty to let my grandfather know when the hog got there. Well, my grandfather had hunting dogs, because he would go hunting from time to time. So we're out here in the streets again. These are dirt roads, no city lights, so all we have is the moonlight. And the trees hung over the street, and they looked scary and spooky. And none of us wanted to go look. And so we would sit there and we'd nudge each other, "You're gonna look, you're gonna look." And the hog came, and we were so terrified, we didn't know what to say. And the dogs started barking, but they wouldn't attack the hog. And so my grandfather finally got up, and the neighbor's cat, Miss Inez, she was right next door, started attacking the hog. And so that was an adventure one summer. But Woodville was a safe place back then. Everybody knew everyone. There was a neighbor down the street on King Street. Grandma would say, "Go down to Miss So-and-so's and bring back 5 stalks of sugar cane." So we'd walk down there, and we get the sugar cane, and we come back, and I had no idea what we were supposed to do with this tall rod of something. And so she said, she cut off a piece, and she said, "You chew it up, and when you get all the sugar out, you're gonna spit that part of it that's left out." And so that was my first dealing of sugar cane. Another time, we had gone down to the farmer's market. I was driving by then, and I started going to school here. When I finished high school, I moved here and stayed with my grandparents and went to Savannah State, which is a local college here, Savannah University now. But it was Savannah State, and my mother attended there, my father attended there, my mother's aunt, and I guess my grandmother attended Savannah State, so it was like an alma mater. And
What year did you attend?
I was at Savannah State in 72. I went in 1972. Or 73. I graduated in 72, and because of my living condition, I had to wait until January of 73 to start my tenure at Savannah State. But my parents, my mother's mother, her diploma was made with sheepskin or some kind of animal skin. That's what their diploma is, and I believe my sister has that in our family armoires. But my mother's, the Sinstack family also had a school called Sinstack Academy. And my grandmother, daughter, Miss Helen, what I always called her grandma because that's the only grandmother I know, would tell me oftentimes that she went to Miss Rebecca's school because Aunt Rebecca Abbott's sister, my grandmother's sister, also was the principal of the school. And so Grandma Helen would often say to me, I looked a lot like Aunt Rebecca. She would say Miss Rebecca. So my grandfather's second wife and his first wife, the family sort of intermixed because his second wife knew about the first wife in the Sinstack family and interacted with them her life. So all of my life I've been told I looked like my Aunt Rebecca. And I've not been shy of, I guess, being a little bit of a tomboy. I wasn't a girly girl. I didn't mind climbing a fence or climbing a tree or doing what normal girls didn't do. So I was that little kid who wanted to do stuff, and I enjoyed following my grandmother, Helen, around because Ransom's first wife, my blood grandmother, Liza, died when my mother was in her 20s. So, and my mother was born in 1922. So in the 1940s, my blood grandmother died, who I never know, only just what I was told of her and her siblings and that part of the family history. But Woodville, to me, is home. There's family everywhere. And even though you're not blood related, somehow you are related. And my grandmother, Miss Daughter, her first husband was the Stevens. His sister, I believe, Tatty, would have wares and things she would sell down at what was City Market back then. And my grandmother's daughter attended First African Baptist Church. My grandfather attended the Congregational Church, which is a branch of the Congregational Church his first wife's grandfather built and was a minister for. So the Sinstacks had a school, a grocery store, church, and community activists. So I've inherited the community activist because I'm president of my neighborhood association. And my history goes deep into the Savannah area. Tama was purchased somewhere along the Savannah downtown area where they had slaves.
So she was the slave of the German sea captain?
Yes, yes. And I'm in the process of trying to locate where she's buried. So Robert Abbott's name was submitted as a name for consideration to replace Calhoun Square, that name. And I was reading something and I saw where a petition was sent for Robert Abbott. I said, what? How did this happen? So I looked at it and then I reached out to the individual and we talked. And so she done research on the Sinstack family. Here in the Woodville area, Sinstack, a lot of people have died out, so the Sinstack name in the Woodville area is not as common as it used to be because a lot of the older individuals are no longer here. Although I'm here in Savannah, I don't live in Woodville, but I'm still connected with the individuals because Charlie Bryan's daughter and grandchildren are still here. And so I often come out and see them, and I want to know what's going on with the neighborhood, what's happening with the neighborhood, and this is a part of my life, a part of my who I am, and it's important to me. So I tell anybody I'm a Georgia peach. I love Savannah, and I was in North Carolina for about 10 years. When my daughter went to college, she ended up going to school at North Carolina Central, which is in Durham, North Carolina. And my marriage at that time, I was not married to my current husband, I was married to another individual. That relationship was dissolving and I moved away. But anyway, being away from Savannah, I would often talk about Savannah. And some of my friends have come to Savannah and they visited, and they said, Savannah's got some creepy trees. It's a little spooky. I said, well, it's a haunted city, if you didn't know. But my friend's daughter, her daughter and my daughter became friends when my daughter was in college. And one year, my daughter's friend Chevelle came. So I live in Midtown near Memorial Hospital on that side of town. And my daughter was here, I think it was around Thanksgiving, and she says, we were going to go down on River Street. And she says, Mommy, let's go to Grandma's. And I said, it's out of the way. Savannah is only this big. We can go and then go downtown. I said, okay. So we came, but my grandparents both are deceased and the house is empty. But my cousin Ann and her family are there. And so I said, well, okay, we'll make it a twofold. We're gonna go see Ann and all of them while we're out there. And I said, to even make it better, let's stop and pick up some pecans. I said, so everybody reach in the back of the car, get one of those grocery bags, and we're gonna pick up some pecans. I said, but be careful, because it might be snakes. So we were at my grandmother's picking up pecans. There are 2 pecan trees in my grandparents' backyard. There was a China berry tree in the front, and in my grandma's mother's house, Aggie's house, she had a mulberry tree. It makes the biggest mess, oh my gosh. But the fruit is good. But anyway, it was a twin tree that grew up. It started off as one and then it branched out and became twins. So we love to get the mulberries from Aggie's. Yeah, living here being here in Savannah is the best part of my life. And my husband and I, we sit and we talk about Woodville and when we decided to get married and where we were going to permanently settle because we were temporarily staying at a place. And I said, let's go back to Woodville. And he's like, nah. So some people love it, some people don't, but I do. I love Woodville, the history of it, our family's connection, the memories, the particular part of the city that belonged to a group of people, and we made it our own. Woodville was on the outskirts of the city limits. It was where the blacks lived, and you felt safe. You didn't feel, because early back in when I was young, coming up in the 60s and the 70s, before I moved here permanently, there was still Jim Crow. I didn't know about Jim Crow. Our grandparents kept us from that. But yeah, we would walk from my grandparents' house to Bay Street to catch the bus, because that's the only way you could get to town. And we'd go down on Broughton Street, and that's where Grandma would shop. And I didn't know when we went into Crest, we were going into a store at that time that was segregated for blacks and whites. We were hidden from that part of what Savannah was. And growing up in Chicago, we didn't have so much of that. So I wasn't exposed to that. And it wasn't until I actually moved here in the early 1970s that I came to know a little bit about Jim Crow. And when I was a young adult and I came to stay here, I felt this is the most backwards place to be. It was a good place, it was a safe place, but it was backwards to me because of the Jim Crow. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, and you weren't allowed this, you weren't allowed that. And that was, to me, crazy. It was different.
You didn't feel that as a child when you come visit?
No, because we didn't go but from King Street to this street with our cousins, and then we would walk over here behind this building along the railroad track, pick berries, and we'd come back. So we really didn't go anywhere without our grandparents. And if we went to town, we were with them, and we were just going in the store. I didn't know we weren't going through the front door or what have you. It was different. The pace was different from that of the city of Chicago. In the city of Chicago, everything was fast, 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 fast. You got here and it's slow and it's calm, and it was different. So as a child, I didn't know any of that. I didn't understand that. It was when I came here to go to college that I came to understand the differences that one city to another and one group of people to another. It was eye-opening for me. And yeah, that was an adjustment, but I still felt it was a good place to be, and I don't think I would have changed anything about that. So yeah, love Savannah. When my grandchildren now come to visit, they say, Grandma, Savannah's a quaint city. I said, it is. But we don't see a lot of black people. I said, that's because we don't go to some of those areas. My grandchildren live in Charlotte. Their mother grew up here. Now, when I was in high school, my high school friend and I, we had a child together. So when I came here to go to college, my daughter was a year old. And so, My cousins helped. My grandmother kept her. That's why I stayed with my grandparents, because I didn't stay on campus. And in order for me to qualify, I had to do this whole residency thing. So, yeah, my grandmother kept my daughter for me while I went to school. And my cousin Junior, his father, Uncle Sad, but the end of the street, way down in the bottom, I don't know if anybody's talked about that, there's a little club that he had. So my cousin Sharon and I were going to be the waitresses at his little club. So Uncle Sad cooked. He's a great cook. Oh man, the meat he would cook. He would cook ribs, he would cook chicken, he would cook goat, he would cook duck. Oh, it was the best over an open flame. He had an outdoor chimney as bigger than this table, and he would get it fired up, and oh man, that meat was good. I had barbecue in the city, but it wasn't like this. And he made the best Brunswick stew. I don't know if you've ever had Brunswick stew, but I don't know how he did it, what he did, but that was the best. And his barbecue sauce, oh man, oh. He took that recipe with him to the grave. However, his son Al gets pretty close, but it's not the same. But back in the 70s, Uncle Sad had a little place down in the bottom. And Sharon and I we went down there one night, and I needed, I forget what Grandma was doing, but anyway, Junior, Uncle Sad's oldest son, was gonna keep a daughter for me while Sharon and I went down in the bottom. And my daughter was one of those chatty little kids. She wasn't a quiet little kid. She was chatty, 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 talk, talk, talk. And so when we got done, I came through his house to go home. And I said, Junior, what did you do to my daughter? He said, I had to shut her up. She was too chatty. He gave her a little, I don't know which beer or something. I said, you done drunked up my child. But anyway, Junior and I would ride to school with him to Savannah State. And his best buddy, actress, AJ, was the drum major for the band. Oh, I'll tell anybody to this day, Savannah State's band is the bomb. Football team, not so much. They very seldom won, but it was the best. But Junior and I had a special relationship, and I was all into nature, and there was this crane or something out on campus, and I'm not sure if it was sick or what happened, but I said, oh, I'm gonna take this back home and I'm gonna stuff it and I'm gonna mount it. I put it in Junior's car, and that thing stuck up his car. Oh gosh. So when we got back, he said, you just like Uncle Ransom. You're just contrary. I said, no, I'm not, Junior. But anyway, Junior used to live in a house back over here. No, back over here on this side of the park, of the playground. And when my daughter was, I guess, about 3, because I was here when she was 2, or going on 2, Miss Seeley's daughter, one of her daughters, my husband's cousin, would come down through here, and they would stop to Miss Daughters and get my daughter Danielle, and they said, we're going to take her to the playground. So this is the community that we lived in. At the corner of Fair and Alfred Street was a 2-story wooden structure called the Hall, I think it was. And they would have community meetings, fish fries, and all kinds of things there. And when that building was torn down, I said, No, they couldn't have torn it down, but unfortunately, the Historical Society didn't know the significance of that structure. So a lot of the homes and places, people have died, and family members are no longer here, so property's been sold, houses have been torn down, new structures are here. So Woodville looks very much different from what it did many years ago. But yeah, there was a drive-in, I remember, up on Highway 80, and we would get to it from my Aunt Marjorie, my uncle's mother-in-law, where my cousins lived on Market Street. It connects to the back of Tompkins School, and we would climb that fence and cut through there, and we'd be in, I forget where we would be, somebody's backyard or at the schoolyard, and we could watch the screen of the drive-in that was on Highway 80. So that was one of the summer things we did. And yeah, so we had the drive-in theater, and Aunt Callie worked at the grocery store, I think it was Piggly Wiggly at one time. Uncle Sad, I don't know what kind of work Uncle Sad did. Uncle Sad was just always here in the community, cooking, doing things with the youth. I never knew him to work a job. He must have done something at some point, but as a child growing up, I never knew what he did. My grandfather worked at the sugar refinery many years ago, but he was retired. And one anomaly that I learned about, never saw this before, was the weather. At one day, it was raining in the front of the house, but the back of the house it wasn't raining. And I thought, how can it do that? If it rains, it just rains all over. Not in Savannah. Point today, it was storming on my side of town. But then when I got to, where was I? I still call it West Broad. When I was on West Broad, which is now MLK, it wasn't raining anymore. So how I travel to get here from where I am is I take Victory Drive, I take Waters Avenue from my house, well, 52nd Street to Waters, Waters to Victory, Victory to MLK or West Broad to Louisville Road. And I remember as a child riding into Savannah on the train, the Nancy Hank. And that was the best feeling, and my grandfather, he'd be standing there waiting for us. And I remember the first time we flew, the airport is not where it is now. It was somewhere else, and the plane landed out in the field somewhere. And we had to step off of it and walk to the building. It was many years ago, but that was one of the flights we had taken. Again, we would come, sometimes my mother would drive from Chicago. Her and her brother were in Chicago. Again, the Sinstack side of the family had all moved pretty much to Chicago. With my cousins who were still here on Market Street, some of them, they didn't leave Savannah early on. They were still here, because I recall as grade school children, we would go to their house and they were still here. But they did eventually come to Chicago. But I can talk about different things with them. And was, growing up, we did things with family. We didn't do things with strange people. You ate with them, you slept with them. It was extended family. So, yeah, Savannah, Woodville is very, very special to me.
think that's probably a good place to wrap it up, just because we have someone else coming.
Okay.
But is any last things you want to get in there about any of
Well,
this?
the Sinstack family goes back to the 1840s here in the Savannah area. My father's family is from White Bluff, and they are island people, and I believe he and my mother met at Savannah State. I'm not sure, but he was in the service, and so my mother traveled with him, and so I was born in New Jersey, and my brother was born in New York. But when my mother and father divorced, we ended up in Chicago because my mother's cousins, the Sinstacks, were there, and she needed help with, I guess, a life for herself and her children. And so that's how I ended up in Chicago. But her brother Robert was still here until he eventually came to Chicago, and then later on he brought his family to Chicago. So,
So fascinating.
yes.